then do you create some sort of system that, you know, really speaks to those elements that connect us as African people? How does that sort of African heritage look like in terms of, you know, the future? In terms of the future, in terms of the spaces that we are going to use to retell our stories, to sort of reclaim those parts of our histories that should be really in the spaces we design, that should be communicated through these things.
Wow. It's funny because it's interesting, you're asking me a question that I want to reference something, but more importantly, upon referencing, I still want to draw context to a very important movement. You know, there was this very strong Pan-African movement, you know, led in the 50s and 60s by Kwame Nkrumah. And there was a sort of a political agenda, a collective Pan-African unionization, but more importantly, you found a renaissance that was birthed from the heart, sort of the belly of Africa. And this came in the form of Lingala music. And I found that sort of the story, you know, of the orchestras that would be, you know, and sort of the music that was coming from Congo, can I be more specific, Zaire at the time, was heavily influenced now by the bachata and musics that came from the Caribbean. There came a point within the 40s and 50s where there was this sort of this understanding that there needed to be a new identity, an African identity. And then that, you know, sort of brought on, you know, the likes of Taboulé and Franco. And more importantly, in 1983, there was a unification where, you know, sort of like, you know, in today's modern culture, you may say Tupac was fighting Notorious B.I.G. You know, we thought that there was conflict between Taboulé and Franco. Yes, there was a specific song that Franco and Taboulé came out with, and I think it was in an album called Shock Shock Shock. But the song, the classic song I speak about, was called Lettre à Mr. le Directeur Général. And, you know, it was a song that attacked the general managers and the bureaucrats who were in charge of Zairean protocols at the time and parastatals. But, you know, a lot of people at the time had seen this song as a direct criticism to Mobutu Sese Seko. But what's equally interesting in your question as we talk about the future, and I'll just read something from the lyrics as an English translation, is that there's been a perpetuation of planning and programming that sort of speaks about what is the new African Renaissance, what's the new African horizon. And this song sort of alludes to that, because I think that the words here still hold weight in some of our problems that we're having today. And if I could just talk about, you know, 15-minute song, the last two stanzas. Franco says, General Manager, you are just a person. General Manager, you are just a person. It is those around that are behaving badly. Question mark. Why? He continues again. General Manager's office has become a stove. Documents are folded, then disappear forever. For it is to reappear, you must be very, very corrupt. Question mark, why? The general manager's ear is full of accusations. And that's how he ends the song.
Wow.
And that's how Taboulé and Franco end the song. And I mean, you know, we dance and celebrate this particular song. I mean, you know, we've got the likes of Mario and all the other, you know, classic songs. But this specifically was sort of one of the most soft power veiled messaging or PR approach to sort of pointing a finger at a national leader. But sort of hiding it within the dance and the lyrics of
kind
music.
Of reminds me of the power of the song Jailer.
Yes.
By Asha.
Yes.
Very powerful way to speak.
Absolutely. So to think of the future and where that begins to take us, we need to think about and remember the number of attempts we've had in the past to talk about the future. And I find if that is the mode of minutes that we need to address to reignite and re-remember, sort of the efforts that have already been put forward,
Yeah.
I think that's a starting point.
Yes.
That's definitely a starting point. You look back to go forward. And I think that's something that, can equally be retold and framed within a framework that is conducive to the needs of the people and the communities at large on the African continent.
Right. So it is vital to remember these things, these parts of our history. But we always forget. We are way too forgetful as people, as communities generally. And I think maybe that is part of the conflict, the inner conflict that we struggle with. I mean, this is on many layers. I say this that it relates to many, many layers and aspects of our lives, and how forgetful we are, and then we get distracted with so much rather than getting down to where it is that we now can draw the most powerful forms of expression of ourselves. Our ability to sort of find those things that make our spaces the most livable,
Yes.
the most caring, the things that make our spaces the most warm and habitable generally.
Absolutely.
I think. I'm very grateful for that thought. And now we've really come to the more or less the end of this conversation. But although, just to wrap it up, I'd like to ask you, Balmoi, to give us maybe your general reflections based on this conversation that we've just had, but also, some of, your general thoughts on the work that you do, the spaces that, you're trying to imagine and reimagine and co-imagine with your, colleagues and all sorts of, that thing. So what would be maybe your concluding little gem?
I think, if you were to ask me this question pre-pandemic, I think the response would be very different in terms of the granular, contextual approach to defining comfort, to defining security, to defining opportunity. I think what's very, or what I draw from sort of the climate that we're living in, has everything to do with consolidation, has everything to do with, sort of a very strong introspective approach to reevaluating one's value, one's lifestyle, and really considering the contributions that you make not only for yourself, for your family, but for your community at large. I think it's a point where we begin to realize, sort of the ghosts that have visited us through isolation.
Yes.
The noise that is so daunting in the silence of isolation.
Yeah.
Sort of the lack of busy rigor that we seem to curate or had curated in our lives has sort of come to, or had come to an abrupt halt.
Yes.
And I think that that in itself has brought a lot of enlightenment.
Yes.
At least consciously, to sort of the fabrics and engagements that I begin to find myself heavily now, deeply rooted in with the work. But more importantly, valuing the connections that have been,
Yes.
are to be, and will be. And looking heavily at what that begins to symbolize and stand for going forward. And I feel that if there's one message to, I would say the youth as a community, is really to be as bold, as loud, and as engaging as they can be. I really think this is the time.
Because the future depends on it?
The future is them. The future is them. The future is now. And I feel that it is in their hands to take control of that space.
Yes.
It is in their hands. And I see this, with the social media space, with the social engagements we see on the streets, and more importantly, the data that starts to tell us clearly that there's a blossoming population
Yes.
behind us that equally are willing to fight not only for what they know and feel is rightly theirs, but more importantly to build a new identity that voices this new future that you speak of for Africa.
Yes.
And I see this clearly. So that is mostly around, really reconfiguring, this aspect of consolidation. What is that? And how will it come into play? And to be honest, whose interest is it?
I know.
Whose
right?
interest is it? Yeah,
Ours, our children, I guess.
absolutely.
Redefining the idea of consolidation in many ways it's also redefining who we are,
Right.
know, in relation to a lot of what we've inherited, sort of, not necessarily undoing, but redoing that process.
Absolutely.
I like that. I really love that. Thank you very much. I am just out of words in many ways, but because I must find words, I'd just like to say thank you. Thank you very much. It means absolutely the most to me. And thank you to our fantastic team behind the camera. They've been quite amazing in making this conversation happen. And of course, the one and only Coffee and Bagels in Kilimani, Nairobi. I don't know, Balmoi has, this is his other home. He just, has not said it, but I'll let him speak a little bit about, what he finds quite special.
Yes. Well, Coffee and Bagel, wonderful location in Kilimani. Great culture. I think coffee in itself, from an African heritage point of view,
Yes.
has been heavily embedded. I think today we still see it in Cairo. You see it out in Tripoli. You've seen it in Casablanca. You come down to Nairobi. Coffee is heavily embedded within social engagements.
Yes.
If anything, it well defines social capital. So really what I'm beginning to say is that coffee is a medium. Coffee in itself is a great way of sort of bringing groups of people together. And this is something that is felt
Yes.
here at Coffee and Bagel. What's really beautiful about the space like this is that the owner and the teams that work with him have packaged this to being a sort of a well-designed, lean supply chain
Yes.
of product.
Yeah.
Not only do they make their bagels homemade, fresh within the cafe, but the coffee is brought directly from the owner's farm.
Nice.
So, and I think you have a chance to see some of those visuals with the 2 coffee trees outside, and then also the decor. It's restored in upcycled wood the owner had kept in stock for about 15 years,
Nice.
knowing that he had a vision at some point that he wanted to start something he couldn't quite define.
Yes.
But he knew that a lot of these building materials would come into use.
Yes.
What is equally interesting is that he took on a very lean, again, concept,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is a modular structure of 2 40-foot containers put next to one another with an outdoor space. So it's all inclusive. The kitchen's inside,
Yeah.
the preparation where you make the coffee as an assembly line also speaks for itself.
Yeah.
It's science, it's culture, it's art, it's festive.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
this is sort of the beautiful stimuli that I think maybe the camera loses. The smell, the taste,
Yeah.
even the great energy, the feeling you get upon ingesting, either the Chemex or the cold brew coffee
Yeah.
that sits in front of us. So I'm deeply, deeply grateful to the team at Coffee and Bagel. And thank you so much, Natasha, for hosting me
Of course.
in my quote unquote boardroom.
Yes, I think you guys have heard for yourselves why this is his other home. He quite relates with this space on a deeper level, greater understanding. And I think, thank you in many ways for allowing us, bringing us into some version of your home. And so, yeah, that marks really the end of this fantastic conversation. I hope you will catch it and many more of the other conversations we've had on Kick It with Muhoza on my Instagram, which is at NatsJustNats on both Instagram and Twitter. If you would like to engage with us on this conversation, please do that in the comments, but also maybe he can tell us his handles as well so that you can find him there if you want to reach out to him directly on questions or, you know, maybe share your sentiments.
Sure.
Where can they find you?
Well, on IG, it's Mambo Heritage as is. And you can also find the website. We're actually upgrading the 2.0 version.
Yes.
Website. It should be out end of October. But that's mamboheritage.com or mamboheritage2.0.com. Should be out very soon. And yeah, that'll be the two quick locations, and Google Balmoi Abbey. Yeah.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.